What we're doing at Sangha Night is we're in the middle of a series. We're looking at what's called the 10 paramitars. Can be translated as perfection, better translated as way to the beyond. The way to the beyond, the way to the transcendental, the way to seeing through the wrong views we have in the world. And we've been working our way through these. Last week I was away, but there was a talk on Virya. And now we're moving on to a new series. So we're looking at meditation. So I'm going to be doing an introductory talk to meditation. And then over the next few weeks, there'll be a number of other talks. For instance, next week there'll be 3 short talks. People talk about their personal experiences of meditation, and then some other talks after that. So what I'm trying to do today is give an overview. So if you remember, what we're using as our guidebook for these, talking about these 10 paramitars, is a book written by someone called Shantideva, who was a medieval Indian monk. And he wrote a book called the Bodhisattva, I think. And that's a guidebook, really, a guidebook to how we can become Bodhisattvas ourselves. Bodhisattvas are beings who their aim is to attain enlightenment, not just for themselves, but for all sentient beings. They want all sentient beings to become enlightened as well. So it's a very sublime ideal, and that's what we're looking at. So even if we might not be going to become bodhisattvas ourselves, we can all become a little bit more bodhisattva-like. So we can become a bit kinder, a bit more loving, have a bit more energy, a bit more ethical. And just as if you were training for the Olympics, you would train in lots of different areas. You might look at your strength, you might look at your cardiovascular ability, you might look at how flexible you are, all those different areas you might look at. So the Bodhisattva, the trainee Bodhisattva, has lots of different areas. Generosity, ethics, forbearance, energy we've looked at, and meditation. Meditation is one area that the trainee Bodhisattva works hard at. But it's interesting that it's only one of the 10. Because sometimes in the West we can associate Buddhist practice with meditation, and that's what we do. In fact, I use the word quite often, mistakenly. I say my practice, and I mean my meditation. And actually, it's very clear here that it's just one of 10. It's a really important one, but the others are important too. So meditation is really important, but it's not the only thing that Buddhists do. And I think it's really important here that we're looking at meditation in the context of what Shantideva was doing. So he's trying to become a bodhisattva, he's trying to gain enlightenment, and meditation is one of the tools that he uses it. Because of course, meditation has many meanings, or covers a whole area of practices, doesn't it, in the West. So there's a kind of meditation, you might be a bit more mindful on the bus. You might call that meditation. You might call going into amazing states of consciousness that are just kind of really taking you to amazing places. That might be meditation. There's all sorts of things that might be meditation, which I'm just going to see what they are. And as I say here, sometimes these different ways of understanding what meditation is can bring confusion. So a question we might want to ask ourselves, I suppose in a way I'm going to explore a little bit, is why do we meditate? Obviously, you come along here and we do meditation and we're taught meditation, but I think it's really good to go back and look at why do we do the practices that we do, including meditation. So perhaps you might be thinking as I talk, well, why do I meditate? What does it do for me? Or if I don't meditate, why don't I meditate? But anyway, why would I want to meditate, perhaps? Why would I want to meditate? So I suppose firstly, as we all know, there's a lot of psychological benefits from meditation. And you can't hope, if you open any kind of healthy, well-being kind of magazine or program or anything like that, it'll probably say meditate, how to meditate. And there's a lot of research that demonstrates that, meditation can really help our lives. And meditating regularly helps with anxiety, it helps with depression, it helps us to be calmer and kinder. And actually that's really, really important because, we need it, it's so horrible, there's so much depression about, there's so much anxiety, people don't have much happiness. even though we live, actually, in the West, at the moment anyway, our lives, we have the kind of freedom and the kind of luxuries that emperors and kings wouldn't have been able to dream of a few hundred years ago. You know, we live amazing lives, but yet a lot of us are not content, and a lot of us experience quite a lot of unhappiness, and can feel quite trapped as well, actually. And so I think, you know, meditation that kind of can help with that is really important. And actually that's what drew me to Buddhism and meditation in the first place. Is I was quite stressed out. I was in a new job with a lot of responsibility, and I'd read that meditation was good for stress, so I went along to find out about it. And of course, I found that meditation was really hard for me, but I really got inspired by the Dharma. So I suppose that's the second thing that we can gain from meditation, I suppose, is it's a way to understand the Dharma more. Yeah. A third thing we might come to meditation from is that we kind of are curious about different states of consciousness. So it's quite an amazing thing about being a human being, I think, is that we can experience quite a lot of different states of consciousness. So not just the mundane one that we normally live in, but there's all these other higher, deeper states that we can be in. And sometimes people have had experiences, so it might have been perhaps out in nature or in particularly extreme situations. They might have had some kind of experience of an altered state of consciousness. Lots of people have drug-related experiences, but whatever it is that kind of gives people that taste, people get this sense that, gosh, there's a potential within me, just between these two ears, as it were, between me, there's a whole number of worlds. And actually there's a potential I've got. I could see the world in quite a different way. I could see the world as being much more beautiful, much more vivid than I do normally. And that's something that we can turn to meditation for as well. And coming back to the second one about meditation as seeing the Dharma, I suppose what meditation can give us is it can give us the mental stability to see things as they really are. So it's a bit like at the moment we see things through a veil, lots and lots of veils. We're not seeing things as they really are, but by meditating we can create a stability of our mind and we can actually move and change. And what Shantideva says is that we can move beyond the self-absorption we have and all that suffering it brings to something much bigger. So actually meditation can be a way for us to access wisdom, to develop wisdom, to become much wiser people. Yes, so meditation can be many things to many people. And as I said, I'm giving an overview today. And in a way, preparing this talk felt a bit like, I think on Saturday, I went out for a walk and I had a new map and I had one of those Ordnance survey maps that has things on both sides. And I kind of was like this in the wind. I learned a lesson which is like, fold it up. But it's just I couldn't find where I was, there was so much stuff, it was so big. And of course, people have been meditating for at least 2,500 years. That's just Buddhist meditation, let alone all the meditation from before that, since that, in different kind of ways of being. There are many methods of meditation. There are many reasons why people meditate. And what I'm going to try and do today is in a way simplify that map and just pull out a few ways that we can look at meditation. And it's important that that map that I was like having a fight with is we'll remember that's very different from what the actual countryside looks like. Okay? So a few kind of contours on a map, you kind of think, well, that must be a hill, but it has quite a different feeling from when you actually see the hill. Do you see what I mean? And I think that's really true of like our experiences in meditation have a very different feeling to them, an emotional feeling, than the lists I'm about to go through. Okay? And I've struggled in the past with getting a bit like, I've read these lists and I've gone, but that's not what my life is like. And I've kind of got quite cross really. And in fact, once thrown a book across a room. Not doing very well with my ill will. And I was taking it too literally. Okay, these are just guides. Okay, they're a bit like the 5 best restaurants to go to if you're in Prague. Or do you see what you mean? It's like they're a guide, and we all have our own experiences. But these guides can be really helpful because they can be a guide from people who've gone beyond us, before us, and who have experienced things before us. And actually, the list can be very helpful because when we're sitting in meditation, something might happen, and we might call to mind a part of one of those lists, and it might be very helpful to us. So I think the lists are very helpful, but you also need to not take them too literally and hold lightly to them as well. Okay. So, Sangha is the name of the person who founded this Buddhist movement, my teacher. And his definition that he gives for meditation is the uninterrupted production of skillful mental states. So I'll just say that again. The uninterrupted production of skillful mental states. Okay? So that's interesting, isn't it? Because actually that gives us a much greater scope for meditation than what we do when we're sitting on a cushion or a chair. It's actually from that perspective, he's talking about meditation's training for a general life approach, not just an end in itself. So it's about living a life one day, which is the uninterrupted experience, I suppose, of skillful mental states. And actually also what that definition of meditation allows for is that we can produce skillful mental states in lots of different activities. So being in nature, exercise, doing arts, creative activity, all of that can lead to skillful mental states. But the difference with meditation is that it's a direct method. Meditation is a direct method where we're working on the mind itself. And in meditation, we can actually directly cultivate states of mind that are much more difficult outside of meditation. Some people might have those states of minds out of meditation, I don't know. But I think the more kind of refined the states get, the more likely they are that you'll experience them in meditation. Okay, so I think they might ask, well, why do we want skillful mental states? You know, we shouldn't take that for granted, but why do we? And the Buddhist perspective on this is that everything that we experience is created by our mind, as the Buddha said. I knew I wouldn't be able to remember the quote. So this is the Dhammapada, which is a collection of the Buddha's sayings from very early on in his teachings, and not very early on in his teachings, but it's some of the first things that were written down, if you see what I mean. So it's a kind of quite likely to be what the Buddha actually said. And the very first couple of paragraphs you will probably have heard before, but it's always worth hearing again. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, even as the cart wheel follows the hoof of the ox. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. So the Buddha is saying very clearly that our experiences are preceded by our mind, led by our mind, and produced by our mind. So they are, working to develop skillful states by working on our mind will allow us to have very different experiences. It will allow us to have much happier experiences, much more positive ones. And if we don't, if we just allow our minds just to go wherever they like, as Shantideva says, he says that we'll be constantly at the mercy of our negative emotions. So we'll be constantly at the mercy of whatever just crops up in a way. Things like jealousy, hatred, envy, resentment, anger, greed, lust, craving, all those kind of things will just blow us about. Because we'll just believe whatever comes into our head in a way. And spiritual practice is very much about seeing that we don't have to be at the mercy of those thoughts, those emotions as they come up. In our lives, so much of what we do is beyond our control, isn't it? Or so much of what happens to us is beyond our control. There's the big picture of what's going on in the world in many different ways, and there's nothing that we can individually do to affect that, it can feel like. But what we can do is we can take responsibility for our own mental states. And meditation is a way that we can do that. There's another, I think it's somewhere in the Dhammapada as well, about we can't cover the whole world with leather and make it soft, but we can cover our own feet with leather. So that if we've got shoes on, we can walk around in the hard ground. And meditation is one way that we can do that we can take responsibility for ourselves and protect ourselves. And I hope you've all experienced, like I have, times when you've sat down in meditation, and you've sat down perhaps in quite a strong grip of an emotion like anger, or I quite often sit down in an attack of meaninglessness, that's a word, which is just like, what's the point? I sit down with that, and at the end of the meditation, I come out just feeling much stronger, have a much better perspective on what's going on, much more positive. And so I think that experience of what just working in meditation for 40 minutes or so can do, and how that can affect my mind, I find very inspiring, actually. And it's something that's proof that we can change. I think I need that proof again and again, that I can actually change my mind, and I can change how I'm feeling about things. Okay, so to look at this kind of map, like I said, we're going to go to one way that Sangha divides up meditation, I suppose. He outlines some ways of understanding it. And he says we can understand that it's concentration, absorption, and insight. So concentration. Concentration isn't the best word, actually, in a way. Well, it depends, because concentration, what it is when we unify our energies around an object of concentration. So it might be around the breath and the mindfulness of breathing. It might be around metta, wishing someone well when we're doing the metta bhavana. And as you know, usually our interests are very scattered, very divided. So we're very distracted, aren't we? We sit down in meditation, and in quick succession, it's like, oh, I have got my awareness on the breath. Oh, but now I'm thinking about work. Oh, now I'm thinking about the pain in my knee. Oh, now I'm thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow. Oh, now I've had such an interesting idea, I absolutely have to think about that for the rest of the meditation. It's just like we're kind of all over the place. And but when we're concentrated, what happens is we unify our energies into what we're actually doing. So we're able to bring that energy to the mindfulness of breathing, to the metta bhavana. And it's not an enforcing of will, okay? It's a gathering of interest. And an enforcing of will might be an experience you've had when you've been studying for an exam. You've thought, I must study, that kind of forced awareness. Or if you have to write reports, you don't like writing reports, or doing spreadsheets. There's a whole kind of things, kind of ways you have to do, where you feel like you're up against a deadline or something. You've got to do it, and you've got to make your mind do it, and you've really got to concentrate really hard on it. Do you know that feeling? That isn't the concentration that we're talking about here. Here we're talking about a natural coming together of our interest, our energies, into the object. And Sangha says it's a matter of understanding, which is interesting. So he says, so concentration is much more a question of understanding, not of exerting willpower, not of forcible fixation of attention, but of understanding. That is to say, of understanding that we do have a multiplicity of interests, so that some of these interests are in conflict, and that sometimes conflicting interests share among them our psychic energy. It's for this reason we're unable to concentrate for long upon any one thing at any one point. So what he's saying is, we just need to understand that of course we're interested in loads of different things. You might have heard me talk about a way of seeing the world that Bodhisattva, a Buddhist writer, talks about, which is it's a bit like, he says we have 100 selves. So that's another way of seeing it. You could see that when you sit down to meditate, 100 selves all sit down, and maybe, 20 of those might be going, yeah, let's do the mindfulness of breathing, but quite a few have got some other different ideas of what they'd quite like to do with that half an hour. And there's lots of things they might want to do. If we haven't had time to reflect on what's going on in our lives, some things will want to do that. If there's something coming up, we've remembered some memories from when we were younger, a part of you might want to think about that. A part of you that's really into having a lot of pleasure might want to think about the pleasure. So it's a bit like there's a whole load of us who are sitting down to meditate. And I suppose the skill, the art of meditating, is how to draw them all in together. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So one thing actually that does help with that is to become more interested in the meditation. And it shows how important being interested in the meditation is. And one way you can do that is maybe to see meditation more as a mythical space. So something that speaks to our deepest values, our heart's desire. I think our heart's desire is really important because that has got a lot of weight behind it. And it's something that we really want to do because we can really get in touch with, when we meditate, with what's most important to us, rather than, oh well, I'm a good Buddhist, I ought to sit down every morning and meditate because that's what you're meant to do, making it a chore like that. Yeah. Okay. So if we are able to bring those 100 selves together, we concentrate, the concentration arises, then we begin to move into absorption. And this is where we leave behind the hindrances. So I'm going to do a little test. So there are 5 hindrances, and we do talk about them on the intermediate course. They really do them for one evening, so I'm not expecting you necessarily remembered them. But we'll just see if we can think what the 5 hindrances are. So just shout out a hindrance. Oh, we've got anxiety and restlessness here. It's sloth and torpor over there. Ill will.
Doubt.
Gut indecision. Craving. Desire for sense experience. Yeah, well done. That's interesting, actually, what everyone came up with. Like a psychological test. So when we leave those behind, and we enter into what's called dhyana, which I hope is here somewhere. Dhyana. Now, dhyana is an interesting word, actually, because we use it in a number of different ways. So actually, it can be used just to mean meditation, actually. But we're using it here in a particular way, which is to talk about a very absorbed state of mind. And it's the word that went on to become Zen and Chan as well, actually. So, so meditation, but particularly we're talking about very specific states. And I'm quickly going to run through these 4 stages of dhyana. And I think this is where I particularly think this is just like a list. Do you see what I mean? Your own personal experience might be different, that's fine, but this can be really helpful. The most important thing about it, actually, is that it's trying to put into words some states that are very hard to put into words. So what I'm going to talk about is give you the traditional metaphors that the Buddha used. And they're kind of from the time of the Buddha. So it'd be great if somebody could think up some more modern ones, actually. I think that's certainly beyond me. But if someone who's like, anyway, yeah, it'd be great if someone could think of some better ones. But anyway, these are what they are. So the first dhyana is, the metaphor for that is soap powder, which they did have at the time of the Buddha, apparently. Apparently there's like soap powder grows on trees, which I've just got a vision of like trees with loads of dads. But it's like there is some kind of a little plant that you can grow soap, and and you get powder from that, and then soap powder mixed with water until it's a perfect ball of soap. And apparently in the original thing it's something like, if the bath attendant or the apprentice of the bath attendant should mix together the soap, powder and the water until it's perfectly mixed. So just perfectly mixed. And that's a simile or metaphor that's used. And this is a kind of, this state is actually very accessible by all human beings, and I hope most of us would have experienced it at some time. So it's a very happy human state. Interestingly, Sangha says that if we were perfectly happy human beings, we could live in this first dhyana all the time. It's like our natural state, it's just that other things get in the way. And it's a state of concentration, ease, happiness. There are some discursive thoughts going on, not many, but there are some thoughts. But I think for those who were at Adhisthana about 10 days ago, I think it was Dave talked about you can either think or be thunk. And I think in the first stage of dhyana, you definitely think rather than finding yourselves being thunk by your thoughts, if you see what I mean. It's like there are some thoughts, but they're very subtle thoughts. So that's the first dhyana. Then from that, and the first dhyana, you can be doing all sort. You could. People definitely experience it when they're playing music, creating art, climbing. I've experienced it when I've been sailing. Maybe reading.
It's flow.
Flow. Yes, it's flow. It's kind of called flow. It's called flow when psychologists write about it. So it's a state that most human beings will have experienced. The second dhyana is, the image for that is like a great tank of water. And in India, they have these great water tanks. And I think what they do is there's a natural spring, and round it they build out of concrete or out of stone or something, some walls, so that it fills up with water, and it's a source of drinking water. And the idea is that second dhyana is like a great tank of water, and it's continually being refreshed and replenished by the spring of water. So it's a bit like something from a deeper place is coming up into our awareness. Or it can feel like it's a deeper state of consciousness, or it can feel like it's a state of inspiration that's coming from the heights. There's no discursive thoughts, but it's a very creative state. And Sangha actually describes it also as perhaps being a poetic state or an artistic state in which creativity might be happening. The third dhyana is the idea of being a flower, that's this lotus completely saturated with water. So it's like our whole, all of our being is in a state of, it's permeated by this state of dissolving, I think. Sangha actually talks about it as being a mystic state in which we feel ourselves dissolving into the universe, or the universe becoming part of us. We realise that we are, there's not a difference between us and the universe. And in the fourth dhyana, the image is that a man comes out of the water on a hot day. I'm sure it can be a woman too, actually, it's just these are from whenever it was that the Buddha wrote. Person comes out of the water on a hot day and wraps a clean white sheet around themselves. So I think they've come out of the water, they're very fresh. And what this image is expressing is a state of radiation, that this contentment, this concentration, this happiness is touching and affecting the whole world, a state of irradiation. And Sangha actually calls it the state of the magician, because it's a state where mental states can affect others, apparently. So that's a taste of those 4 different stages of dhyana. There are 4 more, which I'm not even going to talk about. But I think the point of those is just to kind of, it's amazing what the human mind can do, and all of us can taste those. And for some of us, maybe they do happen like that. My experience, what it is of those dhyanas, is not that it's kind of gone, do you see what I mean, as it's laid out. It's more that at different times I have different experiences. So I think it's good to know about them, know about the traditional descriptions. So that's what dhyana is, and that is that's absorption. And of course those states of mind are very beautiful and very, very pleasurable. And if we do experience them, we can start to crave them. And that's where we get ourselves in some difficulty. So it's a bit like if you have a particular meditation where something quite strong happens, I suppose the task then is to learn how to just let that go. How to sit down when you meditate the next time, just do the mindfulness of breathing, or to do the metta, and not be going, well, you will be going, oh, I want that thing to happen again. But of course, the more we want it to happen, the more it's not going to happen. So there's something to learn about letting go. So definitely, those experiences are very important, but learning to let go of them as well. Letting go of the craving for them particularly. Okay, so from this absorption, in fact, particularly in the first dhyana. So do you remember I said that in the first dhyana there is some discursive thought, but in the other stages there aren't. In the first dhyana, our mind is very, very, it's both subtle, because you can do what you want with it in a way, and it's subtle. It's like it can be very kind of, can work very well. And it's more malleable, it's more very creative. And actually what we can do in that state of mind is we can concentrate on an aspect of reality. So we can use that state of mind to try and understand how things really are. So what we can do in that state of mind is we can reflect, contemplate some Dharma that we've learnt. So perhaps a phrase like, everything is impermanent. We might just allow that, just to explore that in that state of mind. Or you might, in that state of mind, explore your own experience, and from that pull out some kind of Dharma, how it connects to the Dharma as well. And for the Buddha, that first stage of dhyana was the important one. So I think people who are very, very good at meditation, good's the wrong word, but people who are very skilled at meditation, they can go up high into those dhyanas, but actually in order to make spiritual progress, they need to come back down into the first dhyana for insight, seeing things as they really are to arise. And I think that helps us understand what meditation is for. So it's to help to refine our states of our being into states of higher being and consciousness, and then to use that consciousness to reflect on reality itself. So that means that a good meditation is one where we make some movement towards a higher state of consciousness. And we might not enter into absorption proper, but we are still making progress. So every time we sit down to meditate, we are slowly making our way towards that absorption. And the important thing is that we do that. So actually, a really good meditation might be one where even though you're feeling really, really rubbish, you just turn up. That might be a really good meditation. And I think sometimes, I certainly have done it. I feel bad about myself because my meditation is so full of the hindrances, so full of all this stuff, that I think I'm not meditating. And that's really not true. If you remember, when we teach meditation in the Newcomers and Intermediate course, we talk about the moment when you know you're meditating is when you realise that you've taken your awareness away from the object of your concentration, so you've no longer got your awareness on the breath, and you notice it. That's fantastic. And then you come back to the breath. Because what you're doing is you're training your mind to be able to concentrate and therefore to become absorbed. So when we do that process of we get distracted from the object, we come back, that is a really good meditation actually. It's hard to feel it, isn't it? I know when I've had a very destructive meditation, it's really hard for me to think that was a good one, because of course I want all that pleasure. Who wouldn't? But actually working with a hindrance repeatedly is a really positive thing to do. Yeah, so it's interesting actually. In fact, the idea that I'm not a good meditator can really get in the way of meditation, and perhaps is in itself it's a manifestation of the hindrance of doubt. Okay, so doubt that actions have consequences, because actually if we sit and we meditate, it will have consequences. And if, like me, you're one of those people who kind of identifies a bit as not being a good meditator, it might be good to reflect on what doubt is underneath that. Why, where is my doubt in my meditation practice that I don't think it's going to be effective, so I don't want to do it? However, also, if you are someone who finds it easy to be absorbed, who spends a lot of time in these kind of higher states, it's also perhaps you're having visions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all sorts of amazing things are going on. That's great. But it's also good to ask yourself, how are these experiences changing me? Okay? Because of themselves, being in those higher states, lovely, but it's how is it changing you? And I think in a small way I've had an experience of that myself, where for some time I used to do the metta bhavana, and I used to kind of find myself, it felt like I was caught up in this great stream of metta, and it was absolutely beautiful. I'd sit in such joy and delight with this kind of metta and feeling like I was directing it towards lots of people. But then I'd come out of the metta and I'd be just as irritable with other people as I was before. And I realised that although it was good that I was experiencing all that pleasure in meditation, that's a really good thing, I needed to start working a bit harder, or differently actually, because just to sit there, have these lovely experiences, feel this kind of sense of warmth to these people, but then to still be irritable and not actually be able to express metta to people, that wasn't the real thing. You see what I mean? I wasn't really changing. So I kind of took a step back in a way and just brought people to mind much more clearly, actually. So they became much more real and less just a kind of object for me to kind of have these lovely states. So, I think there's several things we need to look at in meditation, and one is it actually effectively changing our lives? Okay, so there are many methods of meditation in the world, and I'm quite quickly now, because I haven't got much time, just going to look at 5 aspects of the spiritual path. Now, for some people, I hope you're going, oh, we did that last series. And you're going, oh gosh, I know all about all of those, and I can go and have a cup of tea now. But just in case you did come to that series and you don't remember, or you're quite new, the 5 aspects of the spiritual path are something that's been sort of developed by Sangha and from an ancient teaching, but he's developed it. And basically it allows us to have a structure for what we're trying to do. So this idea that we are moving towards skillful mental states all the time, this is a way that we can work towards that. The important thing is, I don't know how well you can see this actually, but it's got integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, and receptivity in the middle. And traditionally, you could have a list that went integration, positive emotion, spiritual death, spiritual rebirth, and receptivity. But I prefer it like this because they all feed into each other. Okay. Each of these has got a particular meditation practice with that. Now, I'm going to have to go through it quite quickly, but it's just to give you a sense of how different meditation practices will develop different aspects of us. So when we start practicing as a Buddhist, what we need to do is become integrated. What we need to integrate is we need to integrate both horizontally. So there's an idea that we're a bit like, well, it's a bit like Bodhisattva's idea that we're 100 selves. It's a bit like we're all these different kind of beings, loosely tied together with a name and address, I think Sangha says, and we all want to go different ways and do different things. So what we need to do is we need to bring all those selves together as well as we can. And we need to also integrate vertically, which means we need to bring our depths up and the highest into our, so basically bring our depths into our consciousness and also our highest dreams, our highest selves into our consciousness as well. And the mindfulness of breathing is the classic meditation for integration. Because I think as you do the mindfulness of breathing and your mind wanders off, well, you start to learn about yourself, don't you? You start to learn quite a lot about yourself. And bringing yourself back together, that sense you do when you're doing the mindfulness of breathing, you're integrating yourself together. Also in the mindfulness of breathing, I think that things will come into your awareness from your depths and from your heights. And that mindfulness of breathing is a way to bring that together. So the mindfulness of breathing we associate with integration. Positive emotion. Now positive emotion we need to develop. One of the things we realise as we become more integrated is that we can actually take responsibility for our own mental states. And that in fact that's a key job for us as Buddhists, is to take responsibility for our own mental states. And that means that we can develop more positive emotion in our lives. That means we can have more happiness, more joy, more kindness, more generosity in our lives. And that's why we develop positive emotion. And you won't be surprised to hear that the metta bhavana is the meditation for developing positive emotion. So what we do by developing this integration, so bringing ourselves, these 100 selves together, and developing positive emotion, is we become quite an idea of ourselves as a happy, healthy human being is the phrase, a happy, healthy human being. But almost paradoxically, as we develop that sense, what we then need to do is let go of that identity. We need to stop identifying ourselves with those thoughts, with the things that are coming up, and that's what spiritual death is all about. So spiritual death is, I've got it written down here in much. So it's a bit unlike, so yes, in spiritual death, what we start to see is that we have thoughts, we have mental states, we have all sorts of emotions, but they're not me, they're not mine, they're impermanent, they're not to be identified with. So basically, we can change. And we can do this in everyday life. We can be reflecting all the time, I can change, I can change. And actually, Shantideva has a phrase which is, life breaks its promises. Life breaks its promises. And when life breaks its promises is when we can really see our sense of how we've identified with something. It's when we don't get what we want that we can see how strong this sense we have of being a separate self, self-clinging we have, how strong it is. Because what we find ourselves doing when we don't get what we want is we polarise with other people. Okay, we find ourselves polarising with other people. In fact, we polarise with life itself. It's like life isn't how we want it to be. I mean, that's quite a common experience for me. It's like, I don't want life to be like this. And we start to really feel this sense of ours as separate. And Sangha says that the illusion of self, this attachment to our ego, it's not attachment to a thing, but it's to a way of functioning in the world that is closed, tight, inward-looking. So you probably know that feeling of feeling closed and tight. It's when you're functioning in a way which is kind of looking after me, kind of way. I'm separate from other people. And then you also have experience of when you're functioning in the world in a way which is much more open and much more flowing, when you're not really thinking about clinging to any sense of self, you're just engaging with the world as it is. And spiritual death, in a way, can be seen as when we let go of that clinging and when we relax, let go and open out to the world as it really is. So the practice we particularly take on for spiritual death is a practice that people take on their ordination retreat, which is called the 6 element practice, which is where people explore the elements that we're made up of and realise that it's like, for instance, we all have a sense of earth within us, of something that's quite fixed, but actually the earth that's in my body is not me. It's changing all the time. And people reflect on all the elements in that way. So it's something that happens on an ordination retreat. But it's also something that happens all the time. So if you're doing the mindfulness of breathing, or if you're doing the metta bhavana, spiritual death, letting go, not identifying is really important. For instance, in the stage of the metta bhavana where we think about the difficult person, that can really be a spiritual death practice because one part of me is going, but they deserve me to be angry with them. This idea I've got of how they are and how I am. In order to develop a sense of positive emotion, of metta towards them, I need to let go of that. So I need to let go of me, because actually it's really, I feel quite a strong sense of identity when I don't like someone. I have to let go of that. I also have to let go of ideas I've got about them as well. So particularly for me, that 4th stage in the metta bhavana is a really strong way of practicing spiritual death. From spiritual death, spiritual rebirth follows. And spiritual rebirth is, in that 4th stage of the metta bhavana, you could see it as if you do manage to let go of your dislike for that person in the same way, or still have the dislike, but manage to wish them well. You can see what I mean? You can let go of something and something else will arise. The spiritual rebirth meditation that we do in the 5 aspects or 5 stages is the practice that people take on at ordination, where they take on bringing to mind, meditating on a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. So figures like the Buddha Shakyamuni, Amitabha. Amitabha is the figure that I meditate on. We take on meditating on that figure. And that's because, in a way, we need to be moving towards something with spiritual rebirth. We need to be moving towards something that's beautiful, that's bigger than us, that has the way that we would like to be. So it's a bit like meditating on that figure. We can move towards something much bigger than ourselves, that's very real and embodied, not something that's kind of just an idea. So that's a very quick kind of run through those. In the middle is receptivity, and the practice that's associated with receptivity is just sitting. So here we do the end of meditations. We have a few minutes, don't we, for just sitting. And the idea there is that by letting go of a practice, we can just be receptive to what's going on. We can open up to whatever is in our experience and perhaps start to open up to some sense of beauty, some sense of joy, some sense of pleasure. Just we can be receptive to something higher. So that is a very quick go through the 5 aspects. Okay. So at the very beginning, I said that with all this meditation, Shanti Davis said what we're trying to do is develop wisdom. Develop wisdom. And what the wisdom that he's talking about, he writes about as the wisdom of exchanging self and other. So in a way, it's part of the metta bhavana practice. You can see the practices he talk about. They're kind of another, even kind of really very strong ways of doing that. And the wisdom that he's talking about us developing is that actually Well, everybody suffers. Let me just see if I can find the exact quote, which I couldn't a minute ago. But, yeah. So these quotes that I'm going to say, they come from, Vedanya has done a really excellent interpretation of the Bodhicharyavatara, which you can find on Free Buddhist Audio under the Mitra Study session. And I would recommend you to look at that if you're interested, rather than look at the text itself, because the text has got loads of stuff in. But in the version that Vedanya has done, he's put it into language that I find easier to get to. So the wisdom that Shantideva recommends us to meditate on is, first we should meditate intently on the equality of self and others, thinking, we are all the same, we all feel the same suffering and happiness, so I should look after others as I look after myself. Just as I love and cherish my body, which is divided into many limbs, so I should love and cherish this whole world, which is divided into many beings. And he goes on to say, this stream of mental moments I call my mind, these ever-changing elements I call my body, are not some separate thing that exists in its own right. So who is this separate person that someone's suffering belongs to? Suffering is just suffering, it has no owner. I should relieve it just because it is suffering. I think there's a really powerful, actually, the first one about the limbs. What he is basically saying is, okay, so if I had my foot was sore, my hand would do what it could to make it better. It wouldn't go, oh, it's my foot and I'm not bothered because I'm all right. Do you see what I mean? So within my own body, it's like, definitely my hand would try and help my foot. However, logically, if you think about it, if someone else here is suffering, even though it's not my own suffering that's going on, it is suffering, and it would make sense for me to do as much as I can to alleviate the suffering as I would to alleviate my own suffering. And in fact, it would make more than sense. It's a way that leads to happiness. He goes on to say, whoever longs to quickly save themselves and others should practice this supreme mystery, exchanging self and other. All the suffering in the world comes from obsession with others. All the joy in the world comes from wanting others to be happy. So it might be good to reflect on that. Does all the suffering in the world comes from obsession with ourselves? All the joy in the world comes from wanting others to be happy. Okay, so just a little taste of how he writes about that. This is a little story which I think really helped me understand that, actually. Is a friend of mine, Helen, she went on a retreat and she was having quite a hard time. And she had that kind of conditioning about, I shouldn't ask for help, I shouldn't ask for help. And then she thought, there is suffering going on, happens to be my suffering, so just as you would alleviate anybody else's suffering, it would be good for me to seek help for my suffering. Do you see what I mean? So I just think the fact that it's the way she kind of almost depersonalised the suffering. It's like, when there is suffering, it is good for us to try and alleviate the suffering. So when there's suffering in the world, what Shantideva is saying is what we can do is we can reflect on how we could alleviate the suffering. So that's the wisdom of the meditation that he talks about. So I'm just going to finish off with a little bit from a little paragraph from Sangha, which I really like on the same topic. So Sangha says, in a way, it doesn't matter whether you call it mine or yours. There is this mass of suffering to be got rid of joy which can be brought into existence. We are all affected by the cloud of suffering, so let's all get rid of it, without bothering too much which bit is mine and which bit is yours. It's the same with the cloud of joy and even with the cloud of enlightenment. Just try to bring it into existence. I might do a bit more than you, or you might do a bit more than me, but we will all benefit in the end. We will all share it. We will all enjoy it.